Good evening, and thank you for listening to KMA and tonight's debate featuring three of the candidates running for Iowa's 3rd Congressional District, David Young, Cindy Axne, and Bryan Jack Holder. And now from the KMA Studios, here's tonight's moderator, Mike Peterson.
Thank you, Don Hanson, and good evening. On November 6, 2018, voters across KMA land will go to the polls to decide some important election races. One of the biggest races is for the seat in Iowa's 3rd Congressional District, comprised of 16 counties in southwest Iowa, plus metropolitan areas of Des Moines and Council Bluffs. Political pundits say it's a race that could help decide control of the U.S. House of Representatives following next month's elections. For the next hour, here at the KMA Studios in Shenandoah, the three major candidates will participate in a debate on a number of issues. Let's meet our candidates once again. Congressman David Young, the Republican nominee who is seeking his 3rd term in Congress. Cindy Axne, winner of the Democratic primary. And Bryan Jack Holder, the Libertarian Party nominee. Now, here's the rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate is allowed a 2-minute opening statement. Following the opening statements, the candidates will each have 1 minute to answer each question. Our timer has been instructed to give each candidate a 15-second warning and then a stop notification indicating time is up. Each candidate will then give a 2-minute closing statement near the end of our debate, near the end of the hour. Now, I ask our candidates to strictly follow the format of tonight's debate, as well as we have a lot of material that we want to cover tonight. Now, we drew numbers to determine the order of speaking before tonight's debate. Congressman David Young drew the low number, and he gets the chance to make his opening statement first. Congressman?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, KMA, for hosting this debate. And I want to thank Cindy and Bryan for joining us. This is what it's all about, making sure that people are listening to the voices in the 3rd District and offering solutions to the problems that are out there. It's been an honor to represent this 3rd Congressional District, the 16 counties from Fremont to Polk County, from Potawatomi to Ringgold. And I've always made a pledge to make sure that people have my ear, that I hear their voices, and that's why I go to 16 counties every month. You've seen a lot of commercials and on TV and radio and things in the mail. There's a lot of attacking going on out there. You may hear some attacks tonight, some personal attacks. But I like to attack problems. And when I saw problems with the Veterans Crisis Line, I introduced a bill to get it fixed, and it passed and was signed into law. When I saw problems with the piece of legislation regarding pre-existing conditions that weren't covered, I made sure that I offered an amendment with my colleagues that got passed to protect those with pre-existing conditions. When the debate about water quality and soil health went on, I introduced legislation to make sure that landowners, states, localities had the power to do this work on their own and not a one-size-fits-all approach by the federal government. Making sure we protect Social Security and Medicare is a priority of mine. I'll continue to do that. When Iowans told me that they were being overtaxed at every level, well, at the federal level, we cut their taxes. We made sure that families, small businesses, employers could keep more of their hard-earned dollars because they deserve it and they can spend it better. When it came to our soldiers, our women and men in military, we made sure that we gave them readiness and resources they need, and a pay raise as well. We're going to have a great discussion tonight. But when I heard about the problems, I offered solutions. We delivered solutions. I'm honored to represent the 3rd District, and I'm asking, again, for the vote to return and represent them in Congress.
All right, Congressman, thank you very much. And now we go to Bryan Jack Holder with his opening statement.
All right. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, KMA, for allowing me to participate in this forum tonight. This has been a long time in coming for me. This is the 3rd time I've run for this congressional district with the Honorable David Young sitting next to me. And this is the first debate I've ever been in as a candidate, 3-time candidate for Congress. So I welcome this opportunity to speak with you. For those listening at home that may not know anything about me, I grew up in the Council Bluffs area, graduated from St. Albert High School, attended Iowa Western Community College on a basketball scholarship, was unable to play due to a back injury, but I played on the baseball team, and then finished my bachelor's degree at Bellevue University in Bellevue, Nebraska. Went on to Creighton Law School, where I earned a law degree in 1998, but I decided instead of pursuing a legal career to work in the family photography and video business, which I've done over the last 20 years since I graduated from law school. So I love that KMA is able to do this, and what we're doing here tonight is something I think we need to have more of this in our government and the way it functions. I think it's a wonderful thing that we're allowed to come here and speak with our congressmen and the other candidates. I wish my friend Joe Grandinet and the two other independents were here tonight, but maybe in 2 years they can come here and participate in this, and we can have some other forums. So, the country has a lot of problems, and I believe that more of us need to get involved in trying to help craft solutions that are amenable to everyone. So I advocate for more of us to get our names on the ballot to run for office, because as President Obama told us in his final inaugural speech, he said, his farewell speech, he says, if you're disappointed with your elected officials, you have the right to grab a clipboard and get some signatures and run for office yourself. Now, I took President Obama's advice about 3.5 years before he gave it.
And Bryan, your time is up.
All right.
And now we go to Cindy Axne for her opening statement. Cindy?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Mike, and the KMA family, and of course everybody who's listening tonight. I'm grateful to be here. I'm Cindy Axne. I'm a fifth-generation Iowan who grew up on the south side of Des Moines, and my mom is from a farm in Warren County. And quite honestly, I'm here tonight because of those Iowa values that my parents taught me. I've got a couple sisters, and they said, girls, make sure that you help your friends and your neighbors, but help strangers alike, because when everybody does well, then our community thrives. And they said, stand up for what's right and fight back against injustice, even when it means standing up to someone more powerful. So it's really how I've tried to live my life. It's why I spent a decade in state government, where I had the opportunity to serve the people in the state under both Democratic and Republican administrations, helping to bring in good-paying jobs, making sure that we gave a voice to our most vulnerable people in the community, and definitely holding government accountable to doing what's right. And it's why I fought for things in our own backyard, like securing all-day kindergarten in one of our state's largest school districts, when I found out that half the kids literally lost a lottery and got a 2.5-hour education instead of all day. And I think our public schools should be the great equalizer, so I got busy to help make that happen. And now it's why I'm running for Congress. I'll tell you what, this last year, well, 16 months now, it's just been great. I've had an opportunity to travel this district, talking to Iowans, hearing about their concerns and needs for affordable, effective health care, definitely good-paying jobs, and of course for our seniors to have what it takes to retire with dignity. And one thing I can tell you is that Iowans are working incredibly hard, and we're playing by the rules, but Washington doesn't have our back, and we deserve a heck of a lot better. So I'm going to get out there and make sure that every single Iowan has a voice. And I don't think it matters if you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. We all deserve to have representation in Congress, because we're absolutely all in this together. So I'm here tonight, and I hope to have a great time talking with my fellow cohorts on the ballot here, and hope you learn a little bit more about me.
All right, Cindy, thank you very much. And now let's get to our first set of questions. Our first group of questions concerns the topic immigration. And here is our first question. Earlier this year, the Trump administration implemented a zero-tolerance immigration policy, allowing families and children to be separated at the border. He later signed an executive order to stop this process. Do you believe parents and children should continue to be separated if they're illegal immigrants? Bryan, you do the second number, so you get to answer this question first. You have 1 minute.
I do not believe that families at the border that have come here should be separated. I can't think of anything that would be more unjust than taking a parent from their children. As a parent, a single father myself, my son is the most important thing to me in my life, and I cannot imagine being taken from him. But, as an American that is lucky to have lived here his entire life, and 3 generations of my family have been here in this country, we didn't have to escape some of the hardships that people face in other countries, the tyrannical, totalitarian governments, countries where there is no rule of law. I'm thankful I'm here, that I get to do this, and I don't think, as I said before, I don't think families should be separated at the border.
All right, thank you very much, Bryan. And now we go to Cindy Axne.
Well, I certainly believe that our immigration system is in need of reform. We know it's not working for the people here in our country, but we need to make sure that we do so humanely and with dignity. I don't believe that we should ever tear children from their parents. Certainly as a mom of 2 teenage boys, I understand that bond that mothers and fathers have with their children, and in no way, shape, or form should anyone ever come between that. What we're seeing right now is unacceptable. We still have hundreds of children who haven't been reunited with their families. This is causing irreparable harm, not just to those parents, but to those children as well. And we talk about mental health issues to people in this country. We're creating those. And so I want to make sure we keep our country safe, but we do so with dignity.
All right, thank you very much, Cindy. And now we go to Congressman David Young.
Well, when we heard about this and we saw those images, I spoke up right away and said, this cannot be. We can enforce our laws yet be compassionate at the same time and keep families together. They're leaving some pretty horrible circumstances around the world to get here. The last thing that needs to be done is have their families ripped apart. And so I spoke out. I'm glad that the president issued an executive order regarding that to reverse that. We need to codify that into law. I voted to codify that into law to keep families together. You can do that by making sure that we enforce the law and keep them together, and also make sure that they do have dignity while they're here. We're a nation that is very welcoming. We're compassionate. I'm a 6th-generation Iowan. Those who come here are leaving some pretty awful, horrible circumstances. We don't need to rip their families apart.
All right, thank you, Congressman. And now here's our second question. President Trump has continuously called for construction of a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border. Do you support the funding for this project, and do you believe any wall would be successful in stopping the flow of illegal immigrants into the country? Cindy, you draw the third number, so you get to go first on this question. You have 1 minute.
Well, I believe that our job as representatives is to certainly make sure that our country's safe. And so ensuring that we've got good immigration reform that protects our national security is of utmost importance to me. However, there's ways that we should accomplish that can actually get the job done. I do not agree that we should be spending hard-earned taxpayer dollars on a wall that's not going to be effective. We certainly can build up our security on our borders by more guards, and certainly with aerial technology via drones. There's a lot of things that we can be doing that can keep our country more secure. But certainly putting our money towards a wall that we don't have the funding for, especially after this latest tax bill, which we're now seeing increased debt and not enough money for services that we need, it's not a place where we should be putting our funds.
All right, thank you, Cindy. And now we go to Congressman David Young.
When I first ran for Congress, I met with some constituents or some potential voters and constituents in Clarinda. And they said to me, you know, have you ever checked out the wall? And I said, I haven't. And so when I got elected, I went down to the border in the California sector, Texas sector, and the Arizona sector. And there's different needs for different areas. And I saw firsthand and talked to Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol folks about what the needs are. You do need a wall in some areas. You do need unmanned aerial vehicles in some areas. In California, you need more Coast Guard. You need ground-penetrating radar in some places. You need levees and fencing in others. And so if a wall needs to be put in certain places that's agreed upon that is effective, then we should do it. And if there's other areas where it's not needed, but there are other means to make sure that we control the borders, that's important. But I will tell you this. If we lose this seat and Nancy Pelosi becomes Speaker, their agenda is to essentially have a borderless society and get rid of ICE.
And your time is up, and now we go to Bryan Holder.
I'd like to echo the sentiments of Cindy and David. You know, they frame the issue the way it is. It's a porous border, but, you know, a wall is not going to work for every part of it. So I've seen the pictures that David took when he went down there when he was first elected. And you know, he had a picture with an aerial drone, and there's going to be portions of the border that is the proper security measure. I'm sure we probably need more Border Patrol agents to help patrol the borders, but you know, one of the big issues is that these countries around the world where these people are coming from, you know, they have lots of things going on. Their governments are unstable, and people are fleeing. So, you know, having more a wall, the entire portion, I don't see. You know, neighbors mend fences. They don't build walls.
All right, thank you very much, David. Now we come to our next question. Earlier this summer, a new U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services task force was charged with identifying and naturalized citizens who cheated on their applications and seek the revocation of their citizenship, a process known as denaturalization. Do you support the task force's efforts to investigate naturalized citizens for possible denaturalization? Congressman, you get this first shot.
Well, immigration is an issue that comes up wherever I go here in the 3rd District. And so if you came into this country in an illegal manner and lied about it, I think there should be penalties. There's a right way and a wrong way to come here. You know, it just makes me think about some of those kids that I've talked to who are now, you know, in high school, college, and in starting small businesses right now in our district, who came here in a different way as children brought over by their parents. They call them dreamers or DACA recipients. I think we need to make sure that there's a pathway so they can be here in a legal fashion. I've even supported a pathway to citizenship as long as it's matched up with real border security. And I have voted for that. And I hope that we can get that through in the end. But if you're not up and up and you're lying, I mean, we should not be rewarding that.
All right, thank you, Congressman. Now we go to Bryan Jack Holder.
You know, it's difficult. Our federal government is so large that there may be different agencies that are tasked with investigating who's here and who's here illegally. You know, anyone who faces an investigation and may lose their citizenship and their naturalization should at least be afforded due process as the Constitution requires. You know, it's difficult. I don't think our government actually knows how many millions of people are here illegally. And then there's a concern, too, if you look back to September 11th, that most of the September 11th hijackers had overstayed their visas, and many of them came here on student visas to learn how to fly airplanes. So I wish that the government would focus on the people that have overstayed their visas just as much as they maybe go back and investigate those that have been naturalized.
Thank you, Bryan. And now Cindy Axne.
Well, I'd like to just make sure to address what Congressman Young said earlier. I wanted to make it very clear that I am in full support of ensuring that our borders are safe. I have never once said that I would abolish ICE. So I want to point out the fact that I don't think scare tactics are an appropriate way to address these issues. So what I'd like to do is make sure that we've got strong immigration reform that not only keeps our borders safe, but certainly it does so in a way that protects people as well. I think I agree with the fact that we need to have the DREAM Act passed so that our young people who have grown up here, who are now taxpayers, they have jobs here, and quite honestly, they're contributing to our communities, have an opportunity for that pathway to citizenship.
All right, thank you, Cindy. Now here's our final question in this set of questions. There are reports of growing hostility against immigrants in the United States, illegal or otherwise. Do you believe immigrants are still welcome in this country? Bryan, you get the first shot at this one.
Well, as the great-grandson of immigrants that came here to escape poverty and tyranny in Europe, I still believe America is a welcoming place. I think oftentimes the mainstream media tends to focus upon those that are more of the extremes just because of the fact that it generates revenue, it generates attention. But, you know, I've met people that have come here legally, and I've met people that are here in the country illegally when I've been out petitioning for myself and other candidates. And, you know, I cannot imagine how scary a life it would be to have to live worrying about that if any interaction you have with law enforcement may send you back to your country of origin. So, you know, it's unfortunate that we have this situation, but I think now is the time to address it, and I want to involve all of the people in the district in the decision-making process. I don't believe in unilateral decision-making. So,
thank you very much, Bryan. And Cindy Axne.
Well, I was at an awards ceremony not too long ago for some people in our community who are Latino and have been doing so much community service, they're receiving awards for it. And I'll tell you what, it was incredibly heartening and disheartening at the same time. There were a couple of young people, dreamers, who were receiving awards. They'd grown up here, they went to school here, their families are here, they're now in jobs and they're paying taxes, and they're doing so much for our communities that they're actually receiving awards for it. And they were so grateful to receive those awards and know that what they'd done here in the country that they love so much had made an impact. But at the same time, they said, we're not sure if we're going to be asked to leave this community that we love so much. I hope that we go back to a time that I think Iowa should be proud of, times like when Governor Robert Ray, a Republican, was in office and opened up our borders to the Thai Dam refugees to make sure that they had opportunity because they were fleeing very difficult situations. And I think that Iowa and this country is better than that, and that we can
Cindy,
certainly
your time
treat
is
people
up.
with dignity.
Congressman Young.
I was recently I had an open office hours in Perry, and I sat down with a couple that was very, very concerned about some of the toxic rhetoric that was out there that I've denounced before regarding those who are here, whether they're here legally or illegally. We need to make sure that we show kindness and compassion and respect to everybody, regardless of who they are and how they got here. We also need to make sure that we differentiate when we're talking about the immigration system, whether folks are coming here legally or illegally, the refugees that we are welcoming to here, as well as the asylees, and make sure that we are still that shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan spoke about, where we are very, very welcoming to all. You know, there are folks fleeing some pretty awful circumstances around the world who are being persecuted, and we should continue to accept refugees and asylees.
All right, thank you, Congressman, and that completes our first round of questions. And now with the second round, here is Ryan Matheny.
All right, thank you very much, Mike. Our next set of questions deals with the broad topic of the economy, and we'll start with the House recently passed a new tax reform package at the end of September with a price tag north of $3 trillion, and this is in addition to the $1.5 trillion tax cut package that was passed last year. Do you support this additional tax cut legislation, and what should be done moving forward with the tax code? And we start with Cindy Axne.
This Republican tax bill is disastrous for this country. As a small business owner and a family who has a family, 2 boys, I'm consistently sitting down at the checkbook to make sure that we not only have enough to make sure that my family can get by, but certainly that our business has what it takes to be successful and continue to grow and give people opportunity. So what we're seeing in this tax bill is absolutely putting the burden on hardworking, working-class families in Iowa. Over 80% of the provisions give opportunity to corporations and the wealthy, the top wealthy, by the way. We've reduced taxes for them. There have been reduced taxes for working class families, but that's been offset by the inability to deduct particular elements that we used to be able to do here in Iowa, like state and local taxes. So it's certainly a wash. I want to make sure that any tax plan works for hardworking Iowa families and not for corporations and wealthy like this one is doing.
All right, and next is Congressman Young.
Iowans are being overtaxed, and they were really overtaxed before the Tax Relief and Jobs Act was signed into law. Since that bill's been signed into law, we've seen 1.8 million new jobs in this country. Our GDP is at 4.2%. We were just wondering if we can get to 3%. Our unemployment rate nationally is at 3.7%, and here in Iowa it's at 2.5%, and we're here at a point where we're having a hard time finding workers. It's kind of a good problem to have, I guess. But this tax relief allowed Iowans to keep more of their hard-earned dollars for that mortgage payment, for that car payment, for that family vacation, for that college tuition. It doubled the child tax credit. It doubled the standard deduction. It gave relief to small businesses and larger employers. It even gave relief to Cindy here. She has talked about the tax relief helping her small business. And if this is repealed, it raises taxes on all Iowans, and Iowans are overtaxed enough.
All right, and next we go to Bryan Jack Holder.
Thank you. You know, it's difficult to examine some of these laws, these bills they pass into law because of the fact that just the sheer volume of pages and the sheer number of subjects that these things cover. You know, you could, I'm not sure, Congressman Young probably knows how many pages the new tax bill was, but I think most of us, we probably get about to page 2 and our eyes gloss over. So, you know, any taxation policy should be done to benefit American citizens, and I think that the average citizen should have as much input into these bills that go before Congress as the corporations and the special interests that end up paying for a lot of these campaigns. So I think, you know, as a libertarian, I tend to focus more on the representation part than the taxation part, and the fact that it's been over 100 years since they've added any more seats to the U.S. House of Representatives.
All right, our next question, the economy topic, is while a trade pact between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada has been finalized, trade relations between the U.S. and China remain cold. What do you see as the biggest hurdle to solving the impasse between the two countries? We start with Congressman Young.
Well, we're obviously an exporting state, exporting country. The majority of consumers out there, 90% of them, are outside our borders. And we are an agricultural district, and we have the best goods and services in the world. I'm thankful that we got the Mexico and Canada agreement put together. It's important economically and geographically as well. We need to use those relationships that we just fomented with them in a concerted effort to really isolate China right now. China has been robbing us. They've been hosing us, and we need to make sure that we keep them accountable. The retaliation is hurting our farmers from China. Thank goodness the Trump administration has put forth a mitigation plan that is helping our farmers. They don't necessarily want the help. They want markets. They want trade. They may need it at this time. But the president needs to sit down with the leader of China.
All right, next we go to Bryan Jack Holder.
Well, the trade policy with China, I'm thankful that former Governor Branstad is there as our ambassador with the Chinese. I wish he could communicate directly with the Chinese people as we are communicating here tonight, because China is basically a totalitarian dictatorship. They have a one-party state, and the people themselves have little or no impact upon what goes on in terms of their government policy and their lives. So I understand, this is an agricultural state, and our farmers need to have markets for their products. I would like, us to be able to have a fair playing field with these trade policies, but sometimes when you get too many countries involved and it becomes a big, long, multilateral trade policy, the benefit to us sort of gets lost in the process. So I'd like to see more transparency in this trade policy.
All right, next, Cindy Axne.
Well, certainly these latest tariffs and this trade war has been reckless and is causing harm not just to Iowa but across this entire country. Certainly right here in Iowa, we're feeling the impacts of it. Our manufacturers have already felt it with the earlier tariffs that were put on our products. Certainly now our farmers are feeling it. Right now in our communities, we're seeing banks that aren't loaning as much. We're seeing implement dealers not taking in as many orders, and our farmers are wondering what they're going to look like at the end of this harvest. We're putting this on top of 7 years of already declining prices. We're in a war with China, who, of course, we've supplied our soybeans to. They're now looking to Russia to buy their soybeans. They're buying their corn, from South America. So we've lost these customers. They're not going to come back to an uncertain market just because we've decided to settle a few of these things. We've lost them for this year, and we've lost them for the unforeseen future. It will dramatically hurt our economy.
All right, our next question under economy. Ever since 2009 in March, the stock market has continued to show growth and is now the longest-running bull market in history. What can be done at the federal level to ensure that this growth continues and that we don't slide into another recession? And this starts with Bryan Jack Holder.
Well, I'm not an economist, but from studying history, there is something called the business cycle, and what's happened with our fiscal policy is that there's different economic bubbles out there. We had we have the student loan bubble. There's a car loan bubble. People lost their homes with the crash of 2007, 2008, and the difficulty is that there's all these malformations in our economy, and at some point, some of these bubbles are going to burst. What it looks like after that, if you look at the past, it'll cause another recession. And having another recession is not good for anybody. They say in Iowa we have almost 100% employment in our economy, but I know there's a lot of people that are working multiple jobs in the new gig economy just to get by. So obviously the economy looks good on paper, but I don't believe it.
All right, next, Cindy Axne.
Well, what we need to start with is by making sure that those corporations pay their fair share. They just received a massive tax cut from this Republican administration. What they're doing is profiting from it and putting more money back in the pockets of wealthy shareholders and putting that burden on hardworking Iowa families. And by the way, that money just doesn't trickle down. Our hardworking families here in Iowa need to make sure that we've got opportunity. We may have low unemployment, but we've got a heck of a lot of people who are underemployed, and we have stagnant wages. Our wages haven't gone up to keep costs with inflation for years, and expenses have risen. Healthcare costs are high. Of course, our post-secondary education opportunities are high as well. Our families are barely making ends meet. So we need to focus on that and not more opportunity for those wealthy corporations to put more money in their shareholders' pockets.
All right, and next to Congressman Young.
Thank you. I was recently down at H&H Trailers in Clarinda and DZ Manufacturing in Des Moines, and we were talking about the economy and how we keep this 4.2% growth going. I think it really comes down to 4 points. One, we need to make sure that Washington, D.C. is not pouring out rules and regulations that are overburdensome and that are costing jobs. We need to make sure we keep them in check. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to regulations. Iowa is different than New York. Two, we need to keep taxes low. The tax relief that we've given to individuals and those who create jobs has exploded this economy into new jobs with 1.8 million, and consumer confidence and wages are rising. Three, we need to make sure we have the workers out there to take these jobs that are being offered, get them trained in apprenticeships in our community colleges. And four, we need to make sure that we have fair and free trade. We have to keep that going. I hope the president can land this plane when it comes to trade. I don't like tariffs at all.
All right, and our final question in the economy section. The amount of available housing in Iowa, coupled with rising federal interest rates, have left housing in short supply, especially in rural Iowa and for fixed-income seniors. How will you help jumpstart housing availability in rural Iowa? And we start with Cindy Axne.
Well, I have been across this district talking with as many Iowans as possible and getting out to every single county because I want everyone to know I'm working for everyone in this district, and that means our rural communities. And one of the things that we are lacking is opportunity for housing. I want to put forth an infrastructure bill that helps our rural communities. That's not just our roads and 5,000 bridges in need of repair here in Iowa, but certainly our water and sewer systems. We've got pipes that are 100 years old. They're ripe for failure. And of course, solid cellular and broadband. These are issues that we can solve. You mentioned housing. It's one of the reasons that we are seeing some of our young people leave our rural communities, as well as Iowa in general. There isn't affordable housing for them. So that's another part of the infrastructure bill that we absolutely need to address, and I want to make sure that we do that.
All right, and next we go to Congressman Young.
Thank you. Housing is very, very important all over the district, whether it's in Polk County or down to Hamburg in Fremont County. The issue really is the need is there. It's just a lack of workers in a lot of ways. We need those workers who have apprenticeships, have those trades, because we have our builders and contractors who are looking for them desperately and dearly. When I go to schools, high schools, and folks talk to me about their future, I say don't forget about being able to maybe have that $80,000 to $100,000 job a year by going to a community college, getting an apprenticeship, getting a trade, and getting right into the workforce without having all that college debt. So for whatever reason, there's a stigma behind blue-collar work. My grandfather built tires at Firestone. We know how to work in the Young family, and work brings dignity.
All right, and next to Bryan Jack Holder.
You know, the difficulty with the price and the cost of housing is directly related to the income that people make from their jobs or their career. So in a lot of these small towns all across Iowa, there's not enough careers and jobs there for people to support a family on one income. Sometimes two incomes isn't enough. So, you know, I don't have some magical plan to repopulate southwest Iowa. I was sent a questionnaire through the mail from a organization that asked me how I was going to do that. But, you know, we need to work together with all of the stakeholders in every city, every county in the 3rd District, and really come together and find out, can we attract some workers and some people, some younger people from other parts of the country that want to come and live here and build businesses. I would like for Iowa to become the new Silicon Valley, the Silicon Prairie. They have something like that in Lincoln, Nebraska, just a couple hours to the west of us, and I would like us to have that too.
All right, thank you very much. And now for our next topic, we'll send it back to our moderator, Mike Peterson.
Thank you, Ryan. And our next set of questions concerns agriculture. And here's our first question. In southwest Iowa, producers have frequently voiced concerns about the ongoing trade war with China, especially in relation to the soybean trade market. What would you say to those producers who claim they want trade, not aid, which is in reference to President Trump's $4.7 billion trade war bailout? And Congressman, you get the first shot at this.
I would say I agree wholeheartedly with you that we want trade. We want markets. The aid may be needed at this time. Hopefully it's only short term and not long term. For the long term, we want those trade deals. We need to make sure that we encourage the president to, if he doesn't like the multilateral agreements, to get on with bilateral agreements. I recently, in a bipartisan way, sent a letter to the president making sure that we get rid of these tariffs as soon as we can. If he's using them as a leverage tool, I understand, but I don't want it to be permanent policy because it'll bring retaliation and continue to bring that. And it'll rise the cost of goods on consumers, employment, hurt employees as well. We grow the best products in this district. We need access to markets.
All right, thank you, Congressman. Bryan Jackholder.
This has been a problem throughout American history, is trying to find other markets for our goods. And we have China as our most favored nation in the trade deals. But, they need to get more involved. Our Congress should not let President Trump unilaterally make these decisions that are going to hurt millions of Americans. America needs farmers. I remember growing up with the Iowa Hawkeyes with the ANF sticker on their helmets, and I don't have anyone in agriculture in my family, so this is not an area where I have expertise. But I do know that without the farmers, this state wouldn't exist. So this is an agricultural state, and we need to do everything that benefit the farmers of Iowa.
Thank you, Bryan. Cindy Axne.
Well, my grandparents grew corn and soybeans, and so this is absolutely something that's important for the people that live here in our state. I don't think it's enough that Congressman Young and the Republicans have just written letters to the editor or letters to the president. They need to turn around, go back to Congress, and make sure that we address this issue right away. And by the way, the Farm Bill as well. So I'd like to see that happen. I think that's the job of our representatives, is to make sure that the economic growth and opportunity for the citizens in our district is had. And right now, we're having difficulty. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing China buy their goods now from Russia, from Brazil. They're not going to be coming back to this market to purchase from us. They are purchasing food for their citizens. They are not going to come back to an uncertain market once these trade wars are over. By the way, we're losing thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in the process to begin with. So we need to turn around and get this taken care of immediately.
All right, thank you, Cindy. Here's our next question. On the first day of this month, the U.S. and Canada reached a deal to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement with a new pact that the Trump administration says is easier to enforce. What are your thoughts on the new USMCA deal, and will it provide any relief to area farmers? Bryan, you get the first shot at this question.
I have not had an opportunity to look through this proposal. To me, it appears it's just a rebranding of NAFTA. And NAFTA helped certain sectors of our economy, but, there was a lot of manufacturers that moved their factories down to Mexico where they didn't have to face the taxation and the regulatory environment that they do here. So, ultimately these corporations are beholden to their shareholders, and they're going to do whatever makes them the most money. Sometimes it wasn't cheap enough for them to produce those goods in Mexico, so they moved them to China, to Vietnam, to other countries. Any trade policy that this president and Congress sign off on must benefit Americans first. Our government exists to protect our liberties and our property and our life. And so anything that they do that's going to interrupt with that is not good for us.
All right, thank you, Bryan. Cindy Axne.
Well, I'm happy to see an opportunity for us to have a better trade agreement with both Canada and Mexico, and I think it's important that we look at all of our trade agreements and ensure that they work for Iowa families, our manufacturers, and our farmers. We need to ensure that any agreement levels the playing field, makes sure that the countries that we're in a trade agreement with have the same Fair Labor Standards Acts and regulations as we have that they need to follow to make sure that the playing field is leveled and that we can price our goods accordingly and pay American workers a good wage. So I certainly agree that we should always look to negotiate trade agreements to serve us better. I don't believe we should have gotten into this situation. Certainly the last people that we want to start a trade war with are Mexico and Canada, two of our biggest customers, because we've just created relationships with them that aren't going to serve us well moving forward in the future, and certainly with Canada, who we've always relied on to be a good ally and a good trading partner with us.
All right, thank you, Cindy. Congressman Young.
Iowa is 11th in dairy, and this is going to really open up the market in Canada for dairy, for butter, for ice cream. It's going to help our turkey producers. It's going to help manufacturing as well with the automobile industry and ensure that a lot of those jobs are going to be here in the United States and allows for their wages to increase. There's intellectual property protections, phytosanitary, food safety issues. So I think overall it's trending the right way. I want to do some more research on it and talk to workers and manufacturers and farmers around the district, but I think it's headed the right way. What disturbs me is, unfortunately, the president didn't take the tariffs off of aluminum and steel when it comes to these two countries. I would like to see that happen.
All right, thank you, Congressman. Here's our next question. As the current population of farmers age, there continues to be a need for a younger generation to step up and take over in the agriculture industry. What barriers are keeping young people out of farming, and what can be done to assist the younger generation who wish to get their start in farming? Cindy Axne, you get the first shot at this one.
Well, I've been talking all along how I want to make sure that young farmers have an opportunity, and I think we can do that through our farm bill. It's the reason why I wrote a letter to Congressman Young, and so did to two other of my cohorts, to their opponents, to make sure that they got back out to Washington to actually go back and address this farm bill. It's unacceptable that it hasn't been passed. I think the Senate did a good version of putting together a bipartisan bill that works for this country and certainly works for Iowa farmers. I want to make sure that the farm bill gives our young farmers, minority farmers, and new farmers opportunity through access to capital and better support. Right now, the majority of the funding in our farm bill goes to support large farms, and we need to make sure that we can pass our farms on and support our new young farmers.
Thank you, Cindy. Congressman Young.
It's very important to bring new farmers into Iowa through that next generation to keep those family farms there. I introduced legislation to benefit beginning farmers. Fortunately, within the Farm Bill, there are some provisions in there that are going to be helpful for beginning farmers who want to pass that on to the next generation as well by allowing them to use the loans and funding for other things besides just buying land or equipment or conservation efforts. Those are very, very important. These new farmers are going to also be the leaders in conservation efforts as well. I've been a leader in that as well. There's part of my Water Act is within this farm bill, and from just communicating recently with the chair of the Agriculture Committee, it appears that this bill is pretty much wrapped up. We do need to get it done.
All right, thank you, Congressman. And now Bryan Holder.
You know, like I will say again, you know, I did not grow up in the agricultural sector, and I don't have any farmers in my family. But I think it's one of the most noble undertakings someone could do to have a farm, to run a farm. It's running a small business, and some of them are large operations, and some of those large operations need a lot of people to work in them. But as we've seen over the last 100 years with the advent of technology and the mechanization, some of these farms don't require as many people to run them. So, you know, but that's a trickle-down effect in these small communities because everyone in town with the business relies upon the farmers bringing crops in and bringing their grains and livestock to market. So, you know, to bring people here, we've got to have a better economy and one where people can see the potential that, you know, they're not going to be beholden to the bank if they take over a farm and lose it like they did during the 80s with the farm crisis.
All right, thank you very much, Brian. In the interest of time, we're going to switch to another set of questions on a different topic. This set of questions concerns veterans. Veterans-related matters continue to be some of the most talked about issues nationwide. What do you consider the top issue facing veterans in the 3rd District, and what would you do to address that issue in Washington? We go first to Congressman David Young.
So I live in Van Meter, and right there at the exit is Iowa Veterans Cemetery. And I hold many veterans care fairs throughout the district each year. Without our veterans, we wouldn't have a country. So we all appreciate our veterans, no matter what our political stripes are. And there's a lot of bipartisan efforts within Congress to make sure that our veterans are taken care of. It's really access to health care that they need. For some, they don't want to go too far away from home to get the health care that they need at a VA clinic or VA hospital. But they prefer to go there because they're amongst their own. But we need to give veterans a choice to make sure that they can get the health care that they need when they need it, not just the physical care, but also the emotional war wounds that a lot of our veterans carry with them. We need to make sure that we take care of them in that sense. And that's why I introduced the Veterans Crisis Line legislation that was signed into law in a bipartisan way to give them the support that they need.
Thank you, Congressman. Brian Jackholder.
Well, just to emphasize what Congressman Young said, you know, we wouldn't be here without the sacrifice of veterans. And if you look through American history, there have been 1 million Americans that have given their life in defense of our lives and our liberty and our pursuit of happiness. So, you know, we owe it to them to make sure that the government takes care of them when they come back from a war. You know, I was raised by my grandfather, who served honorably in World War II. He was a prisoner of war of the Japanese for over 3 years, and he barely survived the war. And I wouldn't be here without his sacrifice and his commitment to the Constitution. But, you know, he was so lucky. He got great care through our VA system, and a few years ago, you know, the VA system had some problems. It appears that a lot of these problems have been resolved, and I'm so thankful that David's worked hard to get the suicide hotline fixed, because I know so many of them suffer from PTSD, and we need to do what we can to help them.
Thank you very much, Brian. And Cindy Axne.
Well, I couldn't be more grateful for the service that our veterans have given to this country. We're in debt for what they've done to help us to protect our democracy and to help people around the world. So I couldn't be more grateful. Certainly what our veterans are facing when it comes to health care is inexcusable. We have to make sure that we address the administrative backlog that we're seeing that's keeping them from getting some of the services that they need. We need to go in and make sure that those processes are working well for them. That is what I do best. I have spent a career finding opportunities for organizations to run better and helping to eliminate issues within processes that keep things from running smoothly. So I am really looking forward to going in and looking at this issue and making sure that it's running efficiently so that our veterans get the care that they need. And I'm grateful for what Congressman Young has done with the suicide hotline, because I think the mental health issues our veterans are facing are something that we absolutely need to address. I'd like to see us go even further with that.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to go to another topic here while we still have time. The topic concerns health care. The question is, how do you assess the current health insurance environment in the country, and how can Congress fix any issues? Brian, you get the first shot at this question.
All right, as someone that's been uninsured for several years now, I haven't even had an opportunity to get out and look and see on the open market what it would cost to get health insurance. But I do have a pre-existing condition, so, you know, years ago when I did have insurance, it wouldn't cover the condition that I had. In 2003, I had to have a back surgery, which cost me $26,000 out of my pocket. That, at the time, was an entire year's salary to pay for a back surgery, and I was in the hospital for less than 24 hours. So we need to do something to reduce the costs of these services, and I believe it starts with price transparency, so that us as consumers can shop around. You know, there's a lot of medical procedures that are standardized, that you can do some competitive pricing and find where it's going to be most beneficial to go to that provider.
Thank you, Brian. And now we go to Cindy Axne.
Well, one of the reasons I entered this race is because of the health care issues that we're facing in Iowa. I'll tell you what, this is an issue that I completely understand. As a matter of fact, when my husband and I first started our small business, we couldn't get maternity coverage as part of an individual plan then unless we paid for a rider that cost $1,000 a month and then held that in place for at least a year before becoming pregnant. Well, we couldn't afford that. So when I had my second son, who's now 14, we had to sell our personal items on eBay just to cover the cost of those medical bills because I had a baby in a hospital. And we should never go back to a time where Iowans are forced to determine if they're going to put food on the table or keep the lights on or make sure that their family has the health care that they need. So I want to make sure that we protect Iowans and provide affordable quality care for everyone, that we ensure that we cover people with pre-existing conditions, that we keep kids on plans, that we negotiate the cost of prescription drugs, and that we lower overall cost of insurance overall.
Thank you, Cindy. Congressman David Young.
Well, this is interesting because both sides of the aisle have the same goal here, to make sure that everybody has access to affordable quality care. And the question is, how do you do that? The cost is what's the driver here, and we need to get after the cost. Transparency is very important. If we know what the costs are before we go in to see a provider or hospital, that competition would drive down prices and we'd have better quality as well. My goal has always been to make sure with those with pre-existing conditions have the protections they need. This is not a partisan issue. You have Democrats, Republicans, folks in urban, rural areas. We all have stories in our families, I do, of those with pre-existing conditions. I introduced legislation when the Republican health care bill was put on the floor that passed, that gave protections, 4 layers of protections for those with pre-existing conditions, and that will always be my goal when it comes to health care.
All right, thank you very much, Congressman. We have time for one more question. The topic has to do with security. It's been 17 years since the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. Do you believe the United States is doing enough to prevent similar terrorist attacks in the future? If not, what more needs to be done? I think we went with Bryan first off the last time, so I think, Cindy, you get a crack at this final question first.
Well, I appreciate that, but I do want to go back to discuss something here because, unfortunately, Congressman Young has voted to eliminate coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. He did that in his vote in 2015 to eliminate coverage for people across this nation. He did that again in the disastrous Republican health care bill when he voted for it. And certainly, the amendment that he's discussing to cover people with pre-existing conditions allowed insurance companies to charge any price that they would like. So I don't think that the million people here under age 65 in Iowa with a pre-existing condition would consider that coverage when it's absolutely unaffordable. Bryan just mentioned earlier that he doesn't have insurance, and it's because people with pre-existing conditions can't afford it here in Iowa.
Congressman, you get a 30-second rebuttal on that.
Cindy, what you're saying is just not true, and you're scaring people right now. The amendment that I had passed had 4 layers of protections. 1, to make sure that those with pre-existing conditions could not be discriminated against and not be allowed to have insurance. 2, to ensure that they weren't priced differently. 3, if a state was granted a waiver from the Affordable Care Act, that they had to have protections for pre-existing conditions. And 4, if folks couldn't afford their health insurance for any reason with pre-existing conditions, there was a fund there to make sure that their bills were covered. That amendment passed. That amendment had my name on it.
All right, Congressman Bryan, do you want a 30-second rebuttal on this?
Yes, I do. I just want to give you my personal experience. In my opinion, the individual mandate to purchase insurance violates our liberty of contract. To force us to purchase a product or service against our will, and one that we feel we can't pay for. That's un-American. You know, when the Democrats were in charge of Congress, they could have put through single payer, but they didn't have the political courage to do that. Instead, they threw us to the wolves, to the predatory health insurance companies. So,
all right, thank you, Bryan. Now, we want to get back to the question of security. Again, the question, it's been 17 years since the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. Do you believe the United States is doing enough to prevent similar terrorist attacks in the future? If not, what more needs to be done? Cindy, you have 1 minute.
Well, I think the most important job of our elected officials, and certainly in Congress, is to make sure that we keep this country safe. And I can guarantee to every single Iowan, I will relentlessly protect Iowa and its citizens. And by the way, I've got pretty sharp elbows when it comes to doing what's right. So I want to make sure that we do everything we can to ensure that we're safe and secure in this country. I certainly believe that Congress should have greater input when it comes to authorizing use of force. I want to make sure that we do whatever we possibly can to build our relationships with our allies around the world to ensure that we've got friendly relationships with the people that we count on. So I think that there's a lot of things that we should be doing. We've got opportunity to step up, build better relationships, ensure that we've got great agreements with our allies, and make sure that we've got the military firepower and the support behind that to keep our country safe.
Thank you, Cindy. Congressman David Young.
We've got many in this district who have served in the military and are currently serving in the military, and we've made sure that over the Obama administration, the military readiness and power shrunk, and the commitment to it shrunk. We've rebuilt our military. There's more to go. Peace through strength is something that I adhere to and I believe in. We need to have a strong military. Two, we need to make sure that we're dealing in a realistic way with countries like Iran. The Iran agreement rewarded the world's most dangerous terrorist state. I am glad that the president got us out of the Iran agreement. I never wanted to get into the Iran agreement, and I did everything I could with imposing sanctions on countries that deal with Iran to try to thwart that. As well, I appreciate the president sitting down with the leader of North Korea to try to denuclearize the peninsula there. We need to make sure that our cybersecurity command and operations are on top of things, because I worry about Russia and China and their influence on elections.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And Bryan Jackholder.
In terms of the threat from terrorism, I believe our military and our law enforcement are doing their best to make sure that we're safe and protected. But sometimes there's things that slip through the gaps. There have been several terrorist attacks in this country and just some random shootings where law enforcement had interactions with these people before they went out and committed their acts of violence. So, the agencies need to work together to make sure that we're safe. But if you look back in before September 11th, there was a separation between the CIA and the FBI, and they could not share intelligence because of a memo, the Gorelick memo. Well, that's gone now. So those agencies are able to communicate. One final thing is that the Constitution created a republic, not a global empire, and we should not be the world's policeman.
Thank you very much, Bryan. Well, the time has flown by, and it's time now for the final closing statements by our candidates. Each has 2 minutes to make a closing statement. And Congressman David Young, you go first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, Mike, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity tonight. KMA, thank you. Cindy, Bryan, thank you very much for being here. This is what it's all about. It's about airing out the issues, the problems, the solutions, where candidates are on issues. And people have been listening to us tonight, but my commitment is always to listen to the people of the 3rd District. And I will continue to listen to the people of the 3rd District, wherever they are in the 3rd District, going to every county every month, whether it's one person or 100 people at a time. The voice of the 3rd District matters to me. I carry it to Washington, D.C., and I fight for them every day. I will continue to do that. This election is about judgment and trust. And those are the goals that I keep within me to make sure that I never break the trust of those I represent. I do be held accountable because the people should make sure those who represent them are accountable at every level of government. In the judgment that I put forth, I say a prayer every morning. I read James 1:5 about wisdom to make sure I'm doing the right thing. So I will continue to fight for this district. You've heard a lot of attacks tonight, but I like to attack problems. And I always fight for the people of the 3rd District, and I ask for their vote tonight.
All right, thank you, Congressman. Bryan Jackholder, your final statement.
Mike, I want to thank you and Ryan and everyone here at KMA for allowing us to participate, and I want to thank my friend David and my friend Cindy for coming here and sharing this studio with me tonight. So, I never wanted to run for Congress growing up. I never wanted to run for public office, but I learned a lot of things throughout my education, and 4 years ago I discovered that we've been underrepresented for over 100 years. And I came up with the idea that at some point we're going to have to add more seats to the U.S. House of Representatives. And if we do that, no one has to have an increase in the size of the salary. We can take the existing salary and divide it, take the staff and divide it into smaller districts. But, I live in Council Bluffs in a different media market than down here in southwest Iowa, and a different media market than Des Moines. Congressman Young, he has 3 offices in the district. He's got one in Council Bluffs, one in Des Moines, and one in Creston. I think that's evidence that I think it's time to divide these districts into smaller constituencies, and I call this the Iowa Compromise. So, smaller districts make for better representative government. Iowa once had 11 representatives. Now we have 4. In a couple of years, when they do the census and reapportionment, we may be down to 3. So I would like to have this kind of thing every day if I was your representative. I call it the Iowa Caucus every day, but if I was elected in an alternate reality, I would take David, and I would take Cindy, and I would take Joe Grandinet and the other 2 independent candidates to Washington with me. We could all work together, and we could all sit around the table, discuss these issues. But on top of that, I think there should be a way for the citizens to directly express their opinion and have their votes counted every day. That way, the representatives can make decisions better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bryan. And now, Cindy Axne, your closing statement, please.
Well, thank you, Mike, Ryan, KMA, and to all the listeners out there tonight for joining us. I'm really grateful to have you all here. I'm Cindy Axne, and I would be honored to be your next U.S. congressional representative. I started this race 16 months ago now because I was personally disappointed with the decisions that were being made out in Washington, that were helping corporations and special interests, that were taking us backwards, and that were certainly hurting hardworking Iowans. And I started talking with people in this district to make sure that I understood what we were facing. And I'll tell you what, we've got the best people here that I think you could possibly find anywhere in this country. We are certainly working incredibly hard. And I don't think it matters if you live here in one of our smaller towns like Shenandoah, or if you live out on a farm or in one of our metro areas. We all deserve to have a voice in Washington that represents us. And I'll tell you one thing, I don't think it matters if you've got a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent moniker behind your name. We're absolutely all in this together. And quite honestly, I'm sick and tired of the political partisanship that I'm seeing from both sides out in Washington. And we need to send representation out there that actually understands the struggles Iowa families are facing. And as a mom and a small business owner and a public servant who's helped people here in this state, I think I'd be a great representative to make sure that the voices of the people that live here and are struggling on a day-to-day basis to make ends meet. I'll tell you what, I'm so happy to be a part of this conversation because I think that these are the most important elections in 50 years. The heart and soul of the state is at risk. The heart and soul of this country is at risk. So I ask all of you for your voice and for your vote, because there's a better choice in this election, a choice that will protect our kids and our public schools, a choice that will help our farmers, a choice that will bring jobs to our rural communities, a choice that will make sure that Iowa has a voice out in Washington. Thank you so much. I'm Cindy Axne.
Thank you, Cindy, and that concludes tonight's 3rd Congressional District debate here on KMA. Thanks to all 3 of our candidates. My thanks to Ryan Matheny behind the board, Brett Barnett behind the camera, our engineer Brockmeyer for all his help, Mark Brockmeyer for all his help, as well as Don and Sandy Hansen for their support. We'll have more election coverage, of course, in our Meet the Candidates series of interviews on the morning line on KMA Monday through Friday mornings at 7:35. We're not done with you folks yet either, so be looking for that. And of course, our election coverage will climax on November 6th with live election coverage on election night and KMA Land. And of course, we ask you to exercise your right to vote that day. And if you can't be there in person on November 6th, vote absentee through your local county auditor's office. For the KMA staff, this is Mike Peterson. As Jack Benny would say, we're a little late, so good night, folks.
Thanks for listening to KMA Tonight and this special presentation from the KMA News Department, featuring the candidates running for election in Iowa's 3rd Congressional District. Reaction from tonight's debate and more news all the time at KMAland.com.